This story is titled, I Found Out My Coworkers Have Been Betting on When I'll Quit, and the person with the closest date wins $500. Hey Reddit, I'm a 27-year-old guy and I honestly don't know whether to be insulted, amused, or just completely bewildered by what I discovered yesterday. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm, and apparently my entire office has been running a betting pool on how long I'll last at this job. I found out by complete accident, and now I'm sitting here trying to figure out what to do with this information. Let me give you some context about my work situation. I've been at this company for about 8 months now, and it's my first real corporate job after spending a few years doing freelance work and bouncing between startups. The job itself is fine, nothing amazing but not terrible either. I'm a junior marketing coordinator, basically doing a lot of the grunt work like managing social media posts, compiling reports, coordinating with vendors, all the stuff that the senior people don't want to deal with. The pay is decent for an entry-level position, the benefits are okay, and the office is a pretty standard corporate environment. When I started, I was pretty enthusiastic about the job. I showed up early, stayed late, volunteered for extra projects, all the things you're supposed to do when you're trying to prove yourself. But pretty quickly, I realized that the company culture was kind of weird. There's this very cliquish atmosphere where the people who have been there for years have their established groups, and newcomers are sort of on the outside looking in. I tried to be friendly with everyone, made an effort to chat with people in the break room, asked coworkers to lunch, but I always felt like I was trying too hard and not really fitting in. My direct supervisor, let's call her Amanda, is this woman in her mid-40s who's been with the company for 12 years. She's not mean exactly, but she's very particular about how things should be done, and she has a tendency to micromanage everything I do. She'll ask me to put together a report, I'll spend hours on it, and then she'll tear it apart and basically redo the whole thing herself. It's frustrating because I feel like I'm not learning anything, I'm just doing busy work that she's going to change anyway. There's also this weird hierarchy thing where the senior marketing people treat the junior staff like we're basically interns, even though we're full employees with actual responsibilities. They'll dump last-minute projects on us with impossible deadlines, and then get annoyed when we ask for clarification or push back at all. I've tried to be a team player, but after a few months of this treatment, I'll admit my enthusiasm has definitely waned. I've also noticed that there's been some pretty high turnover in the junior positions. In the 8 months I've been here, 3 other people in similar roles have quit. One guy left after only 6 weeks, said the environment was too toxic. Another woman stayed for about 4 months before getting an offer somewhere else. The third person gave 2 weeks' notice about a month ago, and I remember there being this weird energy in the office, like people were watching to see who would be next to leave. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Yesterday I was in the office later than usual, probably around 7 p.m., finishing up a presentation that Amanda needed for a meeting this morning. Most people had already left for the day, but there were a few stragglers still around. I needed to print something, so I headed to the printer room, which is this small room off the main office area where we have the copier, printers, and a bunch of office supplies. As I got close to the printer room, I heard voices coming from inside. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the door was slightly open and voices carry in that small space. I recognized the voices as belonging to 2 of the senior marketing guys, let's call them Brad and Scott. These are guys in their 30s who have been with the company for 5 or 6 years. They're buddies who often go out for drinks after work, and they've always been sort of dismissive of me in that casual, not outright rude but definitely condescending way. I was about to walk in when I heard Brad say my name. I froze because obviously when you hear someone saying your name, your instinct is to listen to what they're saying about you, and what I heard made my jaw drop. Brad said, so I'm sticking with my date for the pool. I've got October 15th. That's next week, so if he quits in the next few days, I'm taking home that $500. Scott laughed and said, man, you're optimistic. I think he'll last at least another month. I've got November 20th. He seems like the type who will stick it out through the holidays because he needs the money. Brad responded, maybe, but did you see how checked out he looked in the meeting yesterday? He's got that same dead-eyed expression that Rachel had right before she quit. I'm telling you he's done, probably already applying to other jobs. They both laughed and then Scott said, either way, someone's walking away with $500. This is the most fun we've had in the office in months. Much better than the last pool we did. At this point my heart was racing and I felt kind of sick to my stomach. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and went back to my desk. I sat there for probably 10 minutes just trying to process what I'd heard. My coworkers were betting on when I'd quit. There was a pool, apparently with a $500 pot. People had picked specific dates. They were talking about me like I was some kind of office entertainment, like my potential departure was a game for them. I didn't end up printing what I needed. I just packed up my stuff and left, my mind spinning the whole drive home. When I got to my apartment, I immediately called my best friend Mike and told him everything. Mike was appropriately outraged on my behalf, said it was incredibly unprofessional and that I should go to HR immediately. But I wasn't sure if that was the right move. I mean, what would I even say? I overheard 2 guys talking about a betting pool. I don't have any real proof and it would just be my word against theirs. I barely slept last night. I kept thinking about all my interactions with my coworkers over the past 8 months, wondering how many of them were in on this pool. Was it just a few people? Was it the whole office? When people were being friendly to me, were they just sizing me up, trying to gauge how close I was to quitting so they could adjust their bets? This morning I came into work and everything felt different. I found myself looking at everyone with suspicion, wondering who had bet on me and what dates they'd chosen. When Amanda asked me how I was doing, I wondered if she was part of it too. When the receptionist smiled at me, I questioned whether it was genuine or if she was just being nice because she had money riding on my employment status. I tried to act normal throughout the morning, but I was distracted and on edge. Then around 11 a.m., I was in the break room getting coffee when I overheard another conversation. Two women from the sales team were talking, and one of them said something like, "I really hope he makes it to December. I picked the 15th and I could really use that money for Christmas shopping." The other woman laughed and said, "Girl, you're dreaming. He'll be gone by Halloween. You see the way he looks every time Amanda dumps a project on him, he's miserable." I couldn't take it anymore. I cleared my throat loudly so they'd know I was there, and both women turned around with startled expressions. They immediately stopped talking and quickly left the break room, but the damage was done. This wasn't just Brad and Scott. This was multiple people, maybe the entire office, all participating in this betting pool about my employment. I went back to my desk and just sat there, staring at my computer screen, not actually doing any work. I felt humiliated, angry, hurt, and weirdly curious all at the same time. How much money was really in this pot? How many people were involved? What date was the most popular prediction? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? Around lunchtime, I decided I needed to know more before I could figure out my next move. I started paying closer attention to conversations around the office, lingering near groups of people, trying to pick up any other references to the pool. And I didn't have to wait long. I heard someone in accounting mention the October deadline, and someone else reference the pool while talking to a colleague. It became clear that this was common knowledge around the office. People weren't even being particularly secretive about it. They just assumed I didn't know, so they talked about it openly when they thought I wasn't around. The casual nature of it almost made it worse. This wasn't some mean-spirited conspiracy, it was just office entertainment. I was the office entertainment. By mid-afternoon, I'd heard enough fragments of conversations to piece together more details. Apparently, the betting pool had started about 2 months ago, not long after the last person quit. Someone I'm not sure who had suggested it as a joke, and it had snowballed from there. People could buy in for $25 and pick a date. Whoever was closest to my actual quit date would win the entire pot, which had grown to at least $500, possibly more if a lot of people had joined. I also learned that there were side bets happening. Some people were betting on whether I'd give 2 weeks notice or just walk out. Others were betting on what my excuse would be, whether I'd cite another job opportunity or just say it wasn't a good fit. It was incredibly detailed and thought out, like they'd put real effort into analyzing my behavior and predicting my actions. The more I learned, the more conflicted I felt. Part of me was genuinely hurt. These were people I saw every day, people I'd tried to build relationships with, and they were literally betting on my failure. Because that's what it was, right? They weren't betting on my success or my promotion, they were betting on when I'd give up and leave. It felt like a vote of no confidence from everyone around me. But another part of me was kind of fascinated by the whole thing. Like, this was objectively weird and messed up, but it was also kind of hilarious in a dark way. My coworkers had formed this elaborate gambling operation based on my employment status. I was the subject of office-wide speculation. In a weird way, it was almost flattering that people cared enough to bet money on it, even if the caring was completely inappropriate. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, but mostly just thinking about my options. I could go to HR and report the betting pool. That seemed like the professional, by-the-book response. But I wasn't sure what HR would actually do about it. Would they shut down the pool? Would they punish people for participating? Would it just make me even more of an outsider and create an awkward situation where everyone knew I'd tattled? I could confront the people I'd heard talking about it directly, but that seemed messy and potentially confrontational. What would I even say? "Hey, I know you're betting on when I'll quit, and I just wanted to let you know that I think that's really unprofessional." It felt whiny and wouldn't actually solve anything. Or I could quit just to spite them. If everyone was so sure I was going to quit anyway, why not prove them right? But that felt like letting them win. Plus, I actually needed this job. I had rent to pay, student loans to deal with, all the usual financial obligations. I couldn't just walk away without another job lined up, no matter how much I wanted to make a dramatic exit. The fourth option, and this is the one that started to appeal to me more and more as the day went on, was to stay. To deliberately stick around way past everyone's predicted dates and mess up the entire betting pool. If most people were betting on dates in October and November, I could make it my mission to last until at least January or February. I could outlast everyone's expectations just to prove a point. When I got home that evening, I called Mike again and told him everything I'd learned throughout the day. Mike was even more outraged than before, said I should definitely go to HR and possibly even consider talking to a lawyer about hostile work environment. But when I mentioned my idea of staying just to mess with the pool, he laughed and said that was the most petty, perfect response I could have. "Dude," Mike said, "you have to stay now, you have to outlast every single date in that pool. Imagine how mad they'll be when nobody wins because you're still there. That's the ultimate revenge." The more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea. It was petty, sure, but it was also empowering. Instead of being the passive subject of their betting pool, I'd be actively sabotaging it. I'd be taking control of the situation in my own way. And honestly, the thought of all these people losing their $25 because I refused to quit on schedule was incredibly satisfying. But I also knew that just staying wouldn't be enough. If I wanted to really stick around, I'd need to improve my situation at the company. I'd need to get better at my job, build better relationships with people, maybe even find ways to make the work more tolerable. I couldn't just white-knuckle it through months of misery purely out of spite. That wouldn't be sustainable. So I started making a plan. First, I'd document everything I'd overheard about the betting pool just in case I needed evidence later. I'd write down dates, times, who said what, all the details. Second, I'd start looking for ways to improve my performance and my relationship with Amanda. Maybe if I could get her to micromanage me less, work would be more bearable. Third, I'd try to build better connections with some of my coworkers, the ones who might not be participating in the pool or who might be more reasonable. And fourth, I'd start quietly looking for other jobs just in case. Because while I wanted to stay out of spite, I also needed to be realistic. If the environment was truly toxic and unsalvageable, I shouldn't martyr myself just to prove a point. I'd keep my options open and see how things develop. That night, I barely slept again, but this time it was because I was planning and strategizing rather than just feeling hurt and confused. I felt like I'd taken back some agency in the situation. I wasn't just a pawn in their betting pool anymore. I was a player who knew the game was happening. The next morning, I came into work with a different attitude. I smiled at everyone, made cheerful small talk, acted like I was having a great time. If people were watching me for signs of burnout and misery, I'd give them the opposite. I'd be the most enthusiastic, positive employee they'd ever seen. In my first meeting with Amanda that morning, when she started nitpicking one of my reports, I didn't get defensive or frustrated like I usually did. Instead, I asked her questions, took notes on her feedback, acted eager to learn from her expertise. She seemed a bit taken aback by my attitude, but she warmed up to it. By the end of the meeting, she was actually explaining her reasoning instead of just telling me what to do, and I learned more in those 20 minutes than I had in the previous 2 months. Throughout the day, I made a point of being more social. I chatted with people in the break room, asked about their weekends, laughed at their jokes. I wasn't being fake exactly, just making more of an effort. And I noticed that some people seemed confused by my suddenly upbeat demeanor. I caught Brad looking at me with this puzzled expression, like he couldn't figure out why I wasn't showing the signs of burnout he'd been expecting. At lunch, I went out with a few people from my team, something I hadn't done in weeks. We went to this sandwich place nearby, and everyone was talking about their plans for the upcoming weekend. I contributed to the conversation, told a funny story about something that had happened to me recently, and actually had a decent time. One of the women, Sarah, who I'd always gone along with okay, seemed particularly friendly. As we were walking back to the office, she said, "It's nice to see you in a good mood. You seemed kind of down the past few weeks." I seized the opportunity. "Yeah, I was going through some stuff," I said vaguely, "but I'm feeling better now. Actually, I'm really committed to making this job work. I know the first few months have been rough, but I'm in it for the long haul." Sarah smiled and said, "That's great. We need more people who stick around. It feels like everyone's been leaving lately." I wanted to say yeah, and apparently everyone's betting on when I'll be next. But I bit my tongue. Instead, I just agreed and said I was determined to be different. Over the next week, I kept up the positive attitude and increased effort. I volunteered for projects, stayed late when needed, and made sure all my work was as high quality as possible. I also started documenting everything, keeping a detailed log of my accomplishments and the feedback I received. I wanted to build a case for myself, both to justify staying despite the toxic elements and to have ammunition if I ever needed to defend my performance. Amanda seemed to notice the change. In our weekly one-on-one meeting, she actually complimented my recent work and said she'd noticed a real improvement in my attitude and output. She still micromanaged, that seemed to be just her nature, but she was less critical and more constructive. I took her feedback seriously, implemented her suggestions, and made sure to follow up on everything she asked for. Meanwhile, I kept my ears open for any mentions of the betting pool. I heard fewer direct references, but I did catch a few comments here and there. Brad mentioned something about the October deadline passing to Scott, and he sounded annoyed. I realized with satisfaction that his predicted date had come and gone, and I was still there. He'd lost his $25. I also started keeping track of dates that I overheard. November 20th was Scott's date. November 15th was someone from sales. There were several dates clustered around Thanksgiving, probably people who thought I'd quit before the holiday. The latest date I'd heard mentioned was early January, someone who thought I'd stick around through the holidays for the year-end bonus. As October turned into November, I could sense a shift in the office atmosphere. People were watching me more carefully, maybe wondering why I was still there, why I hadn't quit yet. Some people seemed frustrated, probably the ones who'd chosen October dates and had already lost their money. Others seemed curious, like they were trying to figure out what had changed. I also started building genuine friendships with a few coworkers. Sarah from my team became a real ally. We started having lunch regularly, and she gave me advice on how to navigate office politics and work more effectively with Amanda. She never mentioned the betting pool, and I started to suspect she wasn't part of it. There was also a guy from IT named Kevin who I'd gotten friendly with. He was new too, only about 6 months ahead of me, and he understood the frustrations of being junior staff in this environment. One day in mid-November, I was working late again, and I ran into Kevin in the break room. We were both making coffee and we started chatting about work. I decided to take a risk and see if I could get some information. Hey, can I ask you something kind of weird? I said. Kevin looked at me curiously. Sure, what's up? Well, have you heard anything about people betting on how long employees will last here? Kevin's face changed immediately. He looked uncomfortable and a bit guilty. Oh man, he said, you know about that. My heart started pounding. So it's real, it's actually happening. Kevin sighed. Yeah, it's real. I heard about it a few weeks ago. I didn't participate for what it's worth. I think it's really messed up. Do you know how it started? Who's running it? Kevin glanced around to make sure we were alone. From what I understand, it started with Brad and some of the senior marketing guys. They'd done it before with previous junior employees, and when you seemed like you might be struggling a few months ago, they started it up again. It's supposed to be just for fun, but yeah, it's pretty inappropriate. How many people are in on it? I'm not sure exactly, but I think at least a dozen, maybe more. It's mostly the people who have been here for a while. Some of the newer people like me weren't even invited to participate. I processed this information. So it was the veterans, the people who'd been there long enough to see multiple junior employees come and go, who turned it into a game. In some ways that made it less personal. It wasn't specifically about me, it was just what they did. But it also made it more depressing because it meant this was an established pattern, a part of the company culture. Thanks for being honest with me, I said to Kevin. Are you going to do something about it, like go to HR? Well, I thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure yet, I'm still figuring out how I want to handle it. Kevin nodded. Well, for what it's worth, I hope you stick around. It's nice to have someone else who gets what it's like to be new here. That conversation solidified something for me. I wasn't going to go to HR, at least not yet. Going to HR would make this a big official thing, and I wasn't sure I wanted that. Instead, I was going to stick with my original plan. I'd outlast everyone's predictions, and I'd watch the betting pool collapse as no one's date came true. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I'd outlasted at least half a dozen predicted dates that I knew about. The office closed for a long weekend, and I spent the holiday with my family. My mom asked how work was going, and I told her it was fine, getting better actually. I didn't mention the betting pool because I knew she'd just worry and tell me to quit, and I wasn't ready to do that. When I came back after Thanksgiving, something had shifted. People seemed to regard me differently, with maybe a bit more respect or at least acknowledgement. I'd made it past the point where most junior employees quit. I'd survived long enough to be more than just a temporary fixture. In a weird way, outlasting everyone's expectations was earning me a kind of credibility. Amanda even pulled me aside to say that she was impressed with my growth over the past couple months. She said I'd really turned things around, and she was glad I'd stuck with it through the initial adjustment period. She said a lot of junior employees couldn't hack it, but I'd proven I was serious about being there. I thanked her and didn't mention that I'd nearly quit, that I'd been miserable, that the only reason I'd turned things around was because I discovered people were betting on my failure and I decided to spite them all. December arrived, and with it, more predicted dates passing. I was still there, still showing up every day, still doing good work. The betting pool had to be in shambles by now. Almost everyone's dates had passed, and there was still no sign of me quitting. I'd heard through Kevin that people were getting annoyed, that there was talk of declaring the pool void and everyone getting their money back. But apparently some people, the ones who'd predicted later dates, were insisting the pool should continue. There was one guy who'd apparently predicted February, and he was arguing that the pool should stay open until then. There was drama happening around the betting pool itself, which I found absolutely hilarious. In mid-December, the company had its holiday party, a fancy dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. I'd been dreading it, figuring it would be awkward, but I'd committed to staying, and that meant participating in company events. I got dressed up, put on a smile, and went. The party was actually fine. People were in good spirits, there was an open bar, and the social dynamics were looser than they were in the office. I ended up having a good conversation with Scott, the guy who'd predicted I'd quit in November. He was a few drinks in and feeling chatty. You know, he said, I really thought you were going to bail. Back in October, you just seemed so checked out. Yeah, I was having a rough time, I admitted. But I decided to stick with it. I'm glad I did. Scott nodded thoughtfully. Well, good for you, man, seriously. This job can be brutal when you're starting out, but if you can make it through the first year, it gets better. I wanted to ask him about the betting pool directly, to confront him about it right there at the holiday party, but I held back. I was playing a long game here, and revealing that I knew would disrupt my plans. As December progressed toward the new year, I'd settled into a weird sense of satisfaction about the whole situation. I was still at a job that had plenty of problems, still dealing with Amanda's micromanaging and the cliquish office culture, but I'd found a way to make it tolerable. Knowing about the betting pool had somehow defanged it. It went from being this source of hurt and humiliation to being almost empowering. I'd also gotten genuinely better at my job. Despite motivated improvement in my performance had become real skill development. I was handling projects more efficiently, communicating better with team members, and even starting to anticipate what Amanda wanted before she asked for it. I'd proven to myself that I could adapt and succeed even in a less-than-ideal environment. Kevin and I had become good friends, and Sarah had basically become my work mentor. The three of us would often have lunch together, and they'd give me advice on everything from office politics to career development. I never told them the full extent of what I knew about the betting pool, but I think they both suspected I knew something. Right before Christmas, I overheard a conversation that made me realize the betting pool was coming to a head. Brad and Scott were talking in low voices near the coffee machine, not realizing I was in the nearby conference room with the door cracked open. "We need to just call it," Brad was saying. "Nobody's close. The guy who picked February is still in it, but that's 2 more months of this dragging on. Let's just split the pot among everyone and be done with it." "I don't know, man," Scott replied. "Some people are going to be pissed. They'll feel like they lost their money for nothing." They did lose their money for nothing. That's how betting works. We were wrong, he didn't quit. Let's just admit defeat and move on. "What about next time? We doing this again when the next junior person starts?" Brad laughed. "Hell no, this was too much drama, and honestly I feel kind of bad about it now. The kids actually turned out to be pretty solid. I judged him too early." Hearing Brad say that, hearing him admit that I'd proven him wrong, gave me a weird sense of validation. This guy who'd been so certain I'd fail, who'd put money on me quitting, was now acknowledging that he'd misjudged me. It felt like a real victory, bigger than I'd expected. The office closed between Christmas and New Year's, and I spent the break really thinking about what I wanted to do long-term. I'd accomplished my initial goal of outlasting the betting pool predictions, but now what? Did I want to stay at this company? Was it worth staying just to prove a point, or should I start seriously looking for something better? I decided to give it until the 1-year mark. I'd been there 8 months, so that meant another 4 months. If things continued to improve, if I kept developing my skills and building relationships, maybe it could turn into a decent job. But if the environment stayed toxic or I felt like I was stagnating, I'd start job hunting in earnest. When we returned to work in January, there was a weird energy in the office. I later learned through Kevin that the betting pool had officially been dissolved over the break. Nobody had won. The pot had been split evenly among all participants, so everyone basically just got their $25 back. It was an anticlimax, a betting pool that had no winner because the thing they were betting on never happened. I wanted to feel triumphant about it, but mostly I just felt tired. I'd spent months with this knowledge hanging over me, months of spite-motivated performance and careful social navigation. And for what? So that a bunch of coworkers I didn't particularly like could get their betting money back. But then something unexpected happened. In early January, I was called into Amanda's office for what I assumed would be our regular check-in. Instead, she closed the door and gestured for me to sit down with a serious expression. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, and my heart sank. Was I getting fired? Had someone found out that I knew about the betting pool and complained? "Okay," I said cautiously. Amanda sighed. "I found out about something that was happening in the office, something involving you, and I want you to know that I wasn't part of it and I'm absolutely appalled that it happened." My eyes widened. "You know about the betting pool?" She looked surprised. "You know about it?" "Yeah, I've known since October. I overheard some people talking about it." Amanda put her head in her hands. "Oh my God, you've known this whole time and you didn't say anything." I didn't know what to do. I thought about going to HR, but I decided to just focus on doing good work and proving everyone wrong. Amanda looked at me with what seemed like genuine respect. "That's exactly what you did. You know, I couldn't figure out what changed in October. You went from struggling and seeming unhappy to being one of my most reliable team members. Was it because you found out about the pool?" I nodded. "Yeah, I decided that if everyone was so sure I was going to quit, the best revenge would be to stay and do well. I wanted to mess up their predictions." Amanda actually laughed. "That's incredibly petty and incredibly smart. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. You've really proven yourself, and I've been meaning to talk to you about possibly taking on more advanced projects." "How did you find out about the pool?" I asked. "Someone from HR heard about it through the grapevine and brought it to my attention. We're handling it quietly, but there will be consequences for the people who organized it. Brad and a few others are getting written up. We're making it clear that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable." I felt a mix of relief and vindication. So there would be consequences after all, without me having to be the one to report it. HR had found out independently, which meant I wouldn't be labeled as a snitch or a troublemaker. "I want to apologize," Amanda continued. "As your supervisor, I should have been more aware of the environment you were working in. I should have noticed that you were struggling and that other employees were creating a hostile atmosphere. That's on me." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "Honestly, the last few months have been better. I feel like I've found my footing." "You have, and I want to make sure you continue to develop here. We're going to be creating a new senior coordinator position in a few months, and I think you should apply for it. It comes with a significant raise and more interesting responsibilities." I left that meeting feeling like I'd somehow won, not just against the betting pool, but in a bigger sense. I'd turned a toxic situation into an opportunity for growth. I'd proven people wrong, I'd earned respect through performance, and now I was being offered a real path forward at the company. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the betting pool continued. Brad was noticeably quieter around the office, and I heard through the grapevine that he'd been given a formal warning. A few other people who'd been involved were also talked to by HR. The whole thing was handled relatively discreetly, but everyone in the office knew something had happened. The atmosphere shifted after that. People were friendlier to me, or maybe I was just more confident in my place there. I no longer felt like I was on the outside looking in. I'd survived the trial by fire that apparently all junior employees went through, and I'd come out the other side. Sarah told me one day at lunch that she'd heard about the betting pool after the fact and was horrified. "I can't believe people did that," she said. "If I'd known, I would have shut it down immediately." "It's okay," I said. In a weird way, it motivated me to be better at my job. I'm not saying it was a good thing, but I made something positive out of it. "That's a really mature way to look at it," Sarah said. "I think most people would have just quit or made a huge stink about it." I thought about doing both of those things, but I'm stubborn and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Kevin, who was eating lunch with us, raised his coffee cup. "Here's to Spite as a motivational tool," he joked, and we all laughed. As January turned into February, I noticed that Brad started making more of an effort to be friendly with me. He'd say good morning, ask how my weekend was, even complimented my work in a team meeting once. I could tell he felt guilty about the betting pool, and this was his way of trying to make amends without directly addressing what had happened. Part of me wanted to hold a grudge, to stay cold and distant with him and Scott and everyone else who'd participated. But another part of me recognized that holding onto anger would only hurt me in the long run. I needed to work with these people every day. I could either make it awkward and tense, or I could accept their implicit apologies and move forward. So I chose to move forward. I was polite and professional with Brad and Scott. I didn't bring up the betting pool, and they didn't either. We developed a working relationship that was cordial if not exactly friendly. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. In March, the senior coordinator position was officially posted, and I applied for it. The application process involved submitting a portfolio of my work, writing a proposal for how I'd approach the role, and going through multiple rounds of interviews. It was intense and stressful, but I felt prepared. I'd spent the past several months building a strong track record, and I had Amanda's support. When I was offered the position, along with a $15,000 raise, I felt like I'd truly turned the page on the betting pool situation. I'd not only survived, I'd thrived. I'd taken a toxic situation and used it as fuel to propel myself forward. The day I accepted the promotion, Brad approached me in the break room. "Hey, congrats on the new role," he said. "You've really earned it." "Thanks," I said simply. He hesitated, then said, "Look, I know I was wrong about you when you first started. I made some judgments that weren't fair, and I'm sorry about that." It wasn't a direct apology for the betting pool, but it was close enough. "I appreciate that," I said. "We're good." And we were not friends, probably never would be, but we were okay. The toxicity had been addressed, lessons had been learned, and we were all moving forward. Looking back now, several months after I first discovered the betting pool, I have mixed feelings about the whole experience. On one hand, it was hurtful and unprofessional, and it created a hostile work environment that could have driven me away from a job I actually ended up being good at. On the other hand, it became a powerful motivator that pushed me to be better than I might have been otherwise. I don't think companies should tolerate betting pools about employees. I don't think coworkers should treat their colleagues' struggles as entertainment, and I don't think anyone should have to go through what I went through. But I also learned a lot about myself through this experience. I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought, that I can turn negativity into motivation, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding. I've now been at the company for over a year. I'm in a senior position, I'm respected by my colleagues, and I'm actually enjoying my work most days. Amanda and I have developed a good working relationship. Sarah and Kevin are genuine friends, not just work acquaintances. And even Brad and Scott have become tolerable colleagues who occasionally offer helpful advice. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never overheard that conversation in October. Would I have quit like everyone expected? Would I have stayed but remained miserable and stuck in a junior position? There's no way to know, but I suspect that discovering the betting pool, as painful as it was, might have been the best thing that could have happened to my career. I also think about the other junior employees who'd come before me, the ones who'd quit after weeks or months. Had there been betting pools about them too? Had they known, or had they left without ever realizing that their colleagues were wagering on their departure? I felt sad for them, for the hostile environment they'd navigated without knowing the full extent of it. A few weeks ago, a new junior coordinator started in our department. His name is Tyler. He's fresh out of college, and he's clearly nervous and trying hard to fit in. I've made it a point to be welcoming and helpful to him, to be the kind of colleague I wish I'd had when I started. One day I saw Brad and Scott talking near Tyler's desk, and I felt a flash of concern. Were they starting another betting pool? I listened carefully to their conversation, ready to shut it down immediately if necessary, but they were just discussing a project deadline. No betting, no speculation about Tyler's longevity, just normal work talk. Later, I mentioned to Amanda that I wanted to make sure Tyler was supported and that nothing like the betting pool happened to him. Amanda assured me that she'd made it very clear to the entire team that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated, and that she was keeping a closer eye on how junior employees were treated. I've also become something of a mentor to Tyler. We have coffee once a week, and I give him advice on navigating office politics, working with Amanda, and building relationships with colleagues. I've told him in general terms that the first few months can be rough and that it's important to stick with it and prove yourself. I haven't told him about the betting pool. That seems like it would just make him paranoid and uncomfortable, but I've tried to prepare him for the challenges without scaring him off. Now, sitting here writing this all out, I realize how much I've grown over the past year. I went from being an insecure, struggling junior employee to being a confident senior coordinator who's respected in the office. I went from feeling like an outsider to being someone who mentors new employees and contributes meaningfully to the team. And it all started because I overheard two guys talking about a betting pool, got angry enough to channel that anger into motivation, and decided that the best response to people betting on my failure was to succeed beyond their expectations. So Reddit, that's my story. My coworkers bet on when I'd quit, and instead of quitting, I got promoted. I turned their game into my motivation and I came out on top. Was it the healthiest way to handle the situation? Probably not. Should I have gone to HR immediately? Maybe. But I made the choices that felt right for me at the time and they worked out. If anyone reading this is in a similar situation where they feel like they're not valued or respected at work, my advice would be this. First, document everything and know your options. Second, focus on your own performance and development rather than getting caught up in office politics. And third, remember that the best revenge is success. Prove the doubters wrong by being undeniably good at what you do. Also, if you're thinking about starting a betting pool about a coworker's employment status, don't. It's mean, it's unprofessional, and you might end up losing your money when they outlast all your predictions out of pure spite. Thanks for reading this novel-length post. Writing it all out has actually been pretty therapeutic. I've never told anyone the full story before, not even Mike, and it feels good to get it all out there. Edit, wow, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. A lot of people are asking if I ever publicly called out the people involved in the betting pool. The answer is no, I never did. I felt like the situation was handled adequately through HR, and I didn't want to burn bridges with people I have to work with every day. Some of you think I should have been more confrontational, and I get that perspective, but I made the choice that felt right for me. Someone asked if the betting pool money really was just $25 per person. As far as I know, yes. With at least a dozen people involved, that would make the pot around $300 to $500, which matches what I overheard. Not a huge amount of money, but enough to make it feel like a real bet. A few people have asked what advice I'd give to someone who's currently in a similar situation. Honestly, it depends on your circumstances. If you have another job lined up or can afford to leave, maybe quitting is the right call. But if you want to stay, my advice is to focus on being so good at your job that the toxicity becomes irrelevant. Easier said than done, I know, but it worked for me. Thanks again for all the comments and support. It means a lot to know that other people understand how weird and hurtful this situation was, and that most of you think I handled it okay.